We have brilliant intelligence services and police services that do a fantastic job, mainly of intercept, telephone intercept. Telephony intercept is the key counter-terrorism tool. I don't think we should ever be complacent, though. Sometimes people on this program have said, you know, you're more likely to get killed by a fridge falling on you or something like that. But I think the fact that a significant number of Australians wants to kill other Australians for an ideological purpose is shocking in itself. And secondly, we know that terrorist groups have had a long-term aim to get technology which would cause mass devastation. They're very unlikely to get a nuclear device, but they might get a radiological device and make part of our city uninhabitable for 1,000 years, effectively.
So, Greg, just in terms of how to go about avoiding a catastrophic attack, the government will, of course, point to its new super ministry as streamlining intelligence, a kind of homeland security type operation. You've been very critical of that. What do you say to the argument that that's going to make us safer?
Well, I would give the government and the opposition both great credit for being serious about terrorism. They're both doing their best. I don't impute any ill will. I am very critical of the putting all the agencies into one ministry for two main reasons. First of all, we have certain Australian traditions which work very well. One of the traditions is that the ASIO, the Federal Police and the Border Control people are all in separate ministries, and therefore you have three ministers who bring domestic national security expertise to either the National Security Committee of Cabinet or to Cabinet itself. And so you get policy contestability at Cabinet level. We have very good Cabinet government. That's a good thing. The second thing is our Australian traditions work very well. ASIO was very controversial in this country, as is evident in your recent novel, from the 50s to the 70s. One of the ways we got past that controversy was having a very special connection between ASIO and the Attorney-General. It's the only intelligence agency whose intercept warrants are authorised by the executive, not the judiciary. So in order to do that, you have the Attorney-General. And I don't think we should imitate the Home Office of Britain or Homeland Security Department in the US. We're not Britain, we're not the US. I think our existing arrangements work very well. The new arrangements will cause a great deal of bureaucratic distraction while they're being implemented, and I think you'll get a less effective outcome.
Well, I'll throw that straight to Steve Ciobo. Do you accept that critique? I mean, the super ministry will no doubt be put forward as one of the things that's going to streamline our approach to dealing with terrorism.
Look, Tony, with all these things, I mean, I think the starting point is this, and that is for any government, the number one priority is to keep Australians safe and secure. That is our overriding principle that we adopt. And
well, Greg's suggesting we could be less secure if those agencies are overwritten by a single politician.
And so I will talk about that. But I mean, just to pick up on one point that you mentioned about Australia being very lucky. Yes, we have been fortunate. It's the old cliche about we've got to be lucky every single day. They've only got to be lucky once. And that's unfortunately a statement of fact. But in addition to being lucky, we do have absolutely fantastic men and women who are on the front line, so to speak, when it comes to this. And we have stopped 13 major terrorist attacks in this country in the last 3 years. 13. So it does demonstrate the need to remain vigilant on this issue. To go to your point and Greg's point, look, I mean, I take on board his objective criticisms. The view of the government is that this is a necessary move that will help to streamline and better coordinate the sharing of intelligence between agencies. There's still a whole range of safeguards in there, including the required approvals by the Attorney-General. But what we want to do is make sure that we're bringing in that intelligence and that coordination effort among the agencies.
Just while we're on the subject, news tonight on 7:30, or reports tonight, that the people in detention now may have already attempted to smuggle an explosive device onto a domestic airliner. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I'm not in a position to go into any detail because obviously this is an ongoing investigation and a very serious one at that. So what I will say is just to repeat the fact that thanks to the swift action of our agencies, in conjunction with overseas agencies, we've been able to stop another attack.
Jessica, what do you think?
Well, I guess the question is if it's working so well, why are we fixing it? You know, or are we saying that if we had had this Homeland Security Department, whether we would have foiled this attack earlier, sooner, and put less lives at risk? You know, is that the case?
Well, I mean, you're asking me to get into operational matters. What I will say is that the whole point of this, of the ministry, is to coordinate the intelligence information that's gathered and shared between agencies.
Yeah,
so we want in other words, what often happens in government, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And we want to minimise the chance for that to occur.
The thing I don't like about the reshuffle into the Homeland Super Ministry is that I take it to understand that it includes the Immigration Department as well. You know, Dutton's responsibility for that gets meshed in. And if you look at the way our Immigration Department used to work, it used to be called the Department of Immigration and Multicultural Affairs. It was the part of government that welcomed people to our nation and celebrated the fact that we were a multicultural nation. It's been stripped of that responsibility. That then it got beefed up into Border Force, and now it's sort of shut the gates and closed the doors, and it's all wrapped into one. And I don't like that.
Do you want a quick response to that?
Well, of course we haven't shut the gates and closed the doors. I mean, it's wrong to say that. I mean, we are still a very welcoming country. We still want people to come from all around the world. Look, I'm someone, and we're going to get into this whole heritage thing, but my father came to this country stateless as a refugee after the Second World War. I mean, I've got no interest in doing that. So I think it's important that we're not too cavalier with language. We want to make sure that we're still a welcoming country, but make no mistake that the threshold that we use to look at who's coming into our country is the Department of Immigration.
OK, I'm going to just move on. Jim Chalmers, you've been listening to this, and I suppose we could start with one of the key points, because the questioner asked what can we do to mitigate the possibility of a catastrophic attack, and Greg has raised the question about this super ministry. What's Labor's position?
Well, look, Sabrina raised a really good point about what we need to do to maintain that great record that we do have. The points that Greg made notwithstanding, we have been remarkably successful, as Steve and others have pointed out, in intercepting and preventing people from doing the wrong thing. That is partly good fortune, as you said in your question, but it's also the professionalism of the people who work on this round the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We do have terrific police and terrific agencies who, you know, are recognised the world over for their professionalism. Our role in the Labor Party is to be as one with the government where we can to ensure people are kept safe. We treat this mission as a bipartisan mission where we can. And when it comes to things like a Department of Home Affairs, we do our best not to quibble with, you know, the sort of bureaucratic arrangements that are set up. We just seek assurances that these changes are being made for the right reasons. They're being made on the best advice of the professionals.
So just to confirm, Labor would retain a super ministry if in government, is that right?
Well, that's for Bill to determine when we reach government. But what I am saying is we've done our best to be constructive about it. We generally are pretty constructive in this space, because we do think that it's something that requires bipartisanship. But what we've said is we want assurances that it's based on the best advice. We also, frankly, want to make sure that it's done for the right reasons and not to solve some kind of internal political problem that the Prime Minister may or may not have, you know, with Peter Dutton and others. Those are the assurances that we've sought, but we've been constructive as always.
Well, Tony, on that basis, Labor should oppose it then, because the Foreign, Defence, Attorney General and Justice Ministers were all opposed to it in private. The Foreign and Defence Ministers couldn't attend the National Security Committee meeting, and ASIO and the AFP were both opposed to it. So on that basis, Jim, I look forward to Labor saying, no, you're going to keep ASIO with the Attorney General.
So you're on the spot there, Jim Chalmers.
Well,
I mean, are you going to just maintain bipartisanship or listen to other arguments?
We're always prepared to listen to arguments about the bureaucratic arrangements that sit underneath our national security services.
OK, let's hear from May Fong. Now, you've obviously seen, in fact, you reported on the September 11 attacks,
yes.
The aftermath of them, and of course you would have seen the emergence of the Homeland Security Department in the United States. Is that a good model?
Yes and no. I think one of the big problems now with terrorism in America is that what we have is both domestic terrorism and also what you might call international terrorism. And there's a tendency to sort of try and separate. If it's a person who's of Islamic descent, it's terrorism. If it's a white person, no, it's not terrorism. It's just an unfortunate occurrence, perhaps. Now, one of the things I think is really sensible that Australia has is sensible gun laws, which I wish we had in America. So I don't think it's a great model. There are some things that are good about it, but the problem is that the Department of Homeland Security has done some things which are infringe upon civil liberties, which makes it really hard. And especially now we have a president who calls journalists, for example, enemies of the state. And so it makes it really hard.
They all think that. He just says it.
Well, yeah, he says it. But I think Americans are now very wary of the fact that certain things they take for granted, like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, are now, things that are not necessarily enshrined or not under threat. So there's a certain sense of that going on.
OK, let's move on. We've got a lot of questions to deal with tonight. The next one comes from Georgia Stojanovic.
My question is for the Minister. Minister, Labor will be taxing family trusts at 30% to discourage high earners from distributing income amongst family members to minimise their tax bill. Many voters would not be aware that that's actually legal. Why wouldn't the coalition support this change?
Well, in essence, because trusts are used for many, many reasons, and I think it's, it suits Labor's purposes to say, oh, they're just being used to minimise tax and that's it. That, of course, is not the case. The use of trusts...
And we've never said it.
Have multiple... Well, actually, you have, but the reason trusts are used are in relation to charitable trusts, discretionary trusts, and principally for small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses. Trusts are an asset that's typically used, or I should say a vehicle that's typically used, to protect assets so that if, for example, you have a couple that divorces or something like that, the business itself is is protected as an asset. And it's not forced to be split or to have a lot of mess associated with, for example, marital breakdown, which is why for a lot of small business people, when they walk into the accountant and say, this is what we're doing, the first thing the accountant will say is, put it through a trust. Not because it's about minimising tax, but because that's the smart vehicle that you use to make sure that that asset can withstand, a legal claim against it or, as I said, marital breakdown or something like that. So
I'm going to go to just the two politicians first. Got another question on that subject. I'll go to that and hear from the other panellists. Jim Chalmers.
Well, thanks for the question, Georgia, and I think it's a good one. Why wouldn't the government support what is not an especially radical proposal? It's a common sense proposal which says that there are a whole range of trusts which are used for legitimate purposes, which we've said all along. There are reasons why people use trusts. There are including asset protection, including succession planning. There are disability trusts. There are all kinds of trusts which we have left alone in our proposal. But what we are saying is that it doesn't make any sense when the budget's as tight as it is and the tax system is unfair. It doesn't make sense to give the biggest tax concessions to the people who need them least. And as it stands right now, as you rightly point out, not everyone would be aware, but for a class of wealthy Australians, they can distribute their income in quite an arbitrary fashion to their kids who might be at uni or their retired parents or maybe a spouse who doesn't work so that they can determine and game how much tax that person pays, because that person pays the tax at their rate, not at the rate of the person who...
So simply put, if you've got a university student who's earning less than $18,000, you give them a certain amount of money, it's taxed virtually at nothing, is that right?
Exactly right. And if it's $18,000, it's under the tax-free threshold, so that money is not taxed because you've distributed it to your, one of your children who might be at university, and there are all kinds of examples. And all we're saying there, we're not saying that that's been illegal. We're saying that there are legitimate uses for trusts, but we think it's a common sense proposal, not an especially radical proposal, as I said, to say that when we've got a very tight budget, a tax system that's unfair, we've got a society and an economy that's becoming less equal, we think that's a good step to take.
So just quickly, follow-up question. The financial journalist Michael Pascoe wrote today that Labor has wimped this. You're shooting blanks. That Labor's policy is simply entrenching discretionary trusts as a vehicle of choice for the fortunate wealthy. So you're only just reducing the tax margin a little bit, so people can still dodge a lot of tax by using these trusts. So if it's wrong in principle, why don't you just get rid of them?
Because there are legitimate reasons to use trusts, as I said a moment ago. There are reasons why people set up trusts that we don't have a problem with. The issue that we have is with people who can allocate their income.
Yes, but the point is, and the point Pascoe is making,
he wants
exactly, he says get rid of them. If you think they're in some way immoral, that they're doing the wrong thing, why not just get rid of them?
Well, when you make a substantial policy announcement like Chris Bowen and Bill Shorten did over the weekend. There will be people who say you didn't go far enough. There will be people who say you went too far. We've been working on this policy proposal for about a year now, Chris Bowen principally, but all of the economic team and Bill Shorten and all of our colleagues have been working on this for a long time. We've had to think about the tax rate. We've had to think about who it applies to. We've had to think about excluding farm trust, for example. We've had to think about taxing at the company rate, which is not the right way to go about it. All of these sorts of things have been held up to the light. But most importantly, from the point of view of the audience and people watching tonight, is we've said to the Australian people, we are going to put this on the table well in advance of an election. And you can judge for yourselves whether you think what we're proposing is fair. And if you do, you'll support it. And if you don't, you won't support it.
OK, we've got another question on. I'm going to go straight to Steve Raftis and we'll hear from the other panellists. Steve.
Thank you. In a recent article in the Fairfax Press, Fairfax investigative reporters said that 46% of coalition MPs had an interest, in a family trust, a discretionary trust, whilst only a couple of Labor and crossbenchers did. So in the interest of tax equality, why can't all families have access to the benefits of a family trust for PAYG income? In that way, the tax system becomes fair to everyone and we can all legally minimise tax and estate plan. Otherwise, it seems like we have a two-tier tax system.
Yeah, OK, we'll start with Jessica. You've obviously been involved in that journalism that he's talking about there. What's your assessment first before I go to the others?
Not directly, and I guess what those figures show you is that coalition MPs maybe have some more assets and some more income on average than Labor MPs to actually be able to park in these sorts of trusts. You're right that we do sort of have a two-tier tax system. The answer, in my mind, would be to hopefully just have lower tax rates on pay-as-you-go, you know, ordinary salary earners, and that should be where we're trying to head. I do support the policy of cracking down on trusts. I sort of knew I'd made it in this world when my accountant said, you might like to consider whether your family could use a trust arrangement. And they, you know, you don't want to abolish them entirely because they are appropriate for some families and some small businesses. So, for instance, farms. So if you have a farm that's been in the family for generations, but the son who's just inherited it marries a dodgy woman and they get divorced and she wants to take off with the farm. So you want to keep the family farm in that structure. So that makes sense. But these things turn up a lot in sort of Sydney and Melbourne, in Woollahra and Toorak, where you don't actually assume that those families are involved in productive farm activities.
Technically speaking, how much tax could you avoid paying if you had 3 or 4 children?
Well, it depends how old they are. It depends how much you have in there, if they're assets.
Is there a limit how much you could give them as part of this distribution? Could you give each one $50,000, for example?
That wouldn't make sense because the point is you want to sort of give them under $18,000 so that you're parking it tax free. If you give more to the kids, then you're going to bump them up into the top income threshold.
So you give each of your kids $18,000 and on that amount of money, no tax is paid at all?
Exactly, although not for children. John Howard did actually abolish that, so you can't give it to children under the age of 18.
Kids over 18. Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, but this is the point, Tony. I mean, we're getting into quite technical issues, and I know you've corrected it now, but what was just being said was completely wrong. The fact is that when it comes to trusts, there's other downsides which Labor doesn't want to talk about. For example, if you're in a trust, if you've got an asset in a trust, you can't claim tax losses. You can't carry those forward. You can outside of a trust. So let's not pretend. I mean, let me share the sausage making behind this. What happens is Bill Shorten goes, I've got a great idea. Let's go out there and campaign on inequality. Let's find anything we can point to in the tax system that we can claim is inequitable. And they go, let's do something on trusts. I mean, these guys were in government 4 years ago for 6 years. If it was such a problem, why didn't they do anything then? And I'll tell you why, because they know that this is not an issue. What they're now doing is trying to portray this as something that it's not because it suits their narrative.
Now, I've got to ask you the obvious question because I think the questioner said, well, yes, because 49 out of 105 coalition MPs have them. Are you one of those?
I am. I have a trust and it has the grand total of about $2 in it.
Right, so you're not saving any money?
No, I mean, it was set up, correct, and it was set up because I don't have income-producing assets that are sitting inside that trust. But I set it up so that if one day I get out of politics and I make $1, I'll be able to do that through that vehicle and make sure that I've got the business, if that's what it's going to be, protected.
But, the questioner says, why can't PAYG taxpayers do this? Why couldn't it be open to everybody?
Because the way that it works is you put income-producing assets in it. So you can't, as I said, you can't claim losses in a trust. So it's like anything. There are pros and cons to using it. What I resent is that Labor effectively runs a campaign through the media that besmirches anybody who uses a trust and makes out that they are tax cheats, when in reality there are certain advantages but a whole range of disadvantages.
It's just entirely wrong, Steve. I mean, the point that Steve was making is absolutely correct. We do have a two-tiered tax system in this country, and that's what we're trying to address. But we have to be conscious as well.
When you say two-tiered, are you literally saying one for the rich and one for the poor, which is what he's suggesting?
Yeah, for example, the type of discretionary trusts that we want to address are only used by 2% of the population, right? So we're talking about not impacting on 98% of the population, our policy proposal. That's an important point. You say the best way to level the playing field would be to include PAYG taxpayers. We've got to be conscious about the impact on the budget of giving more tax concessions rather than less. We do have a budget which has blown out substantially over recent years, and so we need to be conscious of that. On the point about Steve having a trust and other parliamentarians having a trust, I don't think that Steve opposes this because he has a trust, right? I'll just say that. I think he opposes it for two reasons. One, because it's Bill Shorten's idea, Bill Shorten and Chris Bowen's idea, and we've gotten this unfortunate situation in this country where if Labor has an idea, they reflexively oppose it. We've seen that over and over again on negative gearing. We saw that in other areas as well. But the other issue, which goes directly to your question, is they want to maintain a situation where the biggest tax concessions are provided to the people who need them least. And we don't think, with the budget and the conditions it's in, the tax system as unfair as it is, and inequality being a problem in our economy, we don't think that situation can endure.
OK, Greg Sheridan, you've been listening to this. What do you think?
Well, look, I think the problem is we're caught between two conflicting impulses, both of which are good. We want a more equal and fairer tax system. That's a good impulse. But at the same time, our tax rates are ludicrously uncompetitive. Australia at the moment strikes me like the West Indies cricket team, about a minute before it went from being a world beater to being an easy beat, where everybody could beat them. You know, we just lost the swimming to the Poms. Our cricketers are on strike. The country is starting to fall apart. And the thrust of Labor's policy has some merit. There's certainly some tax abuse in trusts. But Labor doesn't have a coherent tax policy, which would have to say, by all means, clamp down on concessions, broaden the base and lower the rate. And they won't lower the rate. And we're left with extremely uncompetitive tax rates, and everybody in society then becomes a tax dodger. You know, they want to pay cash to their tradesmen and everything. And the law falls into disuse and we become a kind of a version of Italy. And you know, 10 minutes ago we were world
cuddle
beaters.
Or something.
You know? I mean, I love Italians, although, unlike Steve, I gave my Italian passport back sometime. I jest.
We'll come back to that.
One of us is going to need a lawyer.
Actually, May Fong's been listening to this, and of course, inequity has been a huge issue in the United States. Tax system has even been rorted, some say, by the president when he was a billionaire businessman using the bankruptcy courts to keep his casinos afloat. So, what's the feeling of an American listening to this argument here?
Well, I have a lot of Australian friends who do complain that the taxes here are very high, but you get something for your taxes. You get health care for your taxes. And, you know, of course, what's been going on in... Yes, be thankful for that, because right now, of course, you know what's going on in America is there's this huge rancor. And America is one of the only developed countries, I think, that doesn't have a universal healthcare system. You know, my healthcare is dependent on my husband's healthcare system, which is dependent on his job. If he loses his job, then suddenly all our tax rates will go up. If I suddenly have some kind of a pre-existing health condition, then suddenly I might not be eligible anymore. There was a famous TV host whose child has a heart defect. Right, and he went on air and said, you know, my child will never, under the systems they're discussing now, be able to get health care because he has a heart defect. So, yes, you have high taxes, yes, and I think it's wonderful that you're having this great discussion about how to reform or distribute things equally, but you are getting something for it.
Yeah, but for the grace of God, I think you're saying. All right, remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A tonight, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quanta. Keep an eye on our Twitter account, RMIT ABC FactCheck, and the Conversation website for the results. The next question comes from James Morley.
So speaking of citizenship, Mark Carney is the governor of the Bank of England, but he's also a citizen of Canada, Ireland, and the UK. He was chosen as the governor of Bank of England because he had done such a good job previously as the governor of the Bank of Canada. So my question is about citizenship and eligibility, which is the topic of the day. Now, as full disclosure, I'm a naturalized Australian citizen, but also a Canadian and American. So
You're not a politician, are you, Bonnie? You might just have to give that away.
Not a politician, but my question is, why don't we change the Constitution to allow Australians to vote for and elect any Australian citizen that they think could best represent and serve them?
Good question. Greg Sheridan, we'll start with you.
Well, look, two things, really. First of all, you can't change the Constitution. So we can discuss it from here to kingdom come. That's never going to happen. So that is the definition of useless, meaningless talk. But secondly, I actually think it's a good provision of the Constitution. I applaud the Constitution. If you're going to be a member of Parliament and potentially Prime Minister of this country, I want you to have civic loyalty only to Australia. I'm very happy about dual citizens otherwise, and I, accept that my parents came out so long ago, my ancestors, came out so long ago, no other country would have me, but I'm very happy to be just an Australian. But it's not true that you can do any other job except be a politician. You can't join the intelligence services. They'll have foreigners on secondment from allied countries, but you try and join ASIO or ACIS or Australian Signals Directorate. If you're a citizen of China and a citizen of Australia, you won't be accepted. I think this is a good provision. Matt Canavan's case is odd. If what he says is true, he's plainly innocent. Somebody made him a citizen of another country and didn't tell him. It's a bit bizarre. Again, it's Italy. Only Italy could let you become a citizen and not tell you.
Let's hear from Steve Ciobo. I've got to ask you the obvious question. Are you now, or have you ever been, an Italian?
No, I'm not, and no, I haven't been. As I said, my father came... it's an interesting story. Pre-1948, in the period of World War II, and we've spoken about this, back in Italy as it was, my father's mother is Italian, but if she married a foreigner from another country, they lost their Italian citizenship. And so, as part of that wave of migrants that came to Australia post the Second World War, Dad and his family came across stateless. So no, I'm not. But to go to your question, I think ultimately it goes to Greg's point. It would require a referendum, and I just don't think it would be successful in passing through. So those arguments will be put, but ultimately it's the people's choice in terms of a referendum, and I doubt that it would happen.
Jessica, what do you think?
Well, I appreciate the question, because if you sort of look at countries around the world, we are the most sort of multicultural in terms of people who weren't actually born here, who are citizens, the foreign-born proportion. So, we're wonderful, we're diverse. I have to admit I was born in the US, but I was the daughter of a diplomat, so I'm not allowed to claim a US passport, and I can still run for Parliament, which everyone... I don't know. I'm not, sorry. I'm sure you have fun, but I couldn't do it.
It's a good pathway to a discretionary trust.
There's opportunity there. We're the land of opportunity. But I actually agree. Section 44, you just have to read it. It's really clear. You can't have dual citizenship. And I also agree that, if you're going to govern this land, you should have loyalty only to Australia. So I'm happy to kick out anyone who happens to find out that they're a dual citizen.
Let's hear from Jim Chalmers.
Yeah, James, it's not actually true that, those great people who might have dual citizenship can't run for our parliament. It just means that they have to renounce the non-Australian citizenship. And there are a lot of terrific people in our parliament who've done that. And some, including, Sam Dastyari and others, have had to go through quite an onerous process to do that. But they did it because it was worth it. They wanted to represent, in his case, New South Wales in the federal parliament. And so good people who do come here and want to be in the parliament, there is a pathway for them. It doesn't prevent them from doing it. I think what this whole episode has done is it ensures that people who do put their hand up for Parliament will take that process more seriously. In the Labor Party, we've got a very stringent process you have to go through. I had to go through it 4 years ago when I nominated the first time. And so the onus is on parties and individuals to make sure that they're eligible. When it comes to eligibility, there are broader issues as well beyond citizenship in the Constitution. And historically, one of the things that has concerned me is the uncertainty for people like teachers and nurses, for example, who are public servants and have to go through the process of resigning. They're allowed back in later on, but that creates an uncertainty. We might be artificially limiting ourselves in other parts of the community as well. But I think overall, the onus is on people to do the right thing. People have been doing the right thing to make themselves eligible, and these cases that we're seeing now are cases of where people have not.
Mei Fong, we know because of the Obama birther scandal that you can't be president of the United States unless you were born in America. What about this idea of joint citizenship, and can congressmen be citizens of two nations or at least have the passport of another nation?
Well, the whole debate about nationality, citizenship, dual citizenship that you're having here seems to me it's a debate of privilege to some extent, because when you have multiple citizenships, it's a question of having choices, right, and options. And there are many people in this world who do not. And there are many refugees in this world who are trying to get somewhere else, and it's a much more difficult task. And one of the things in Australia, of course, historically has not always been a land of opportunity for everyone to come at one time. You know, you did have certain citizenship acts that precluded people of a certain colour coming over and getting citizenship. Now that's changed, I understand.
Well, we just took 12,000 Syrian refugees, for example, which is more than the United States.
Which is more than the United States has, you know. So there should always be a certain open flow, because, you know, this is the wonderful thing. Citizenship, you get a flow of ideas and talents and people. But for a lot of us, we are able to trade our skills and talents to change countries at will. And for a certain set of people who, not for a lack of skills, but for a lack of luck, do not have that choice. So I think it's a great discussion, but it's almost like, you know, should we drive a Porsche or a Lamborghini? You know?
Good one. Well, actually, there's a person with their hand up, waving around right up the back. We'll quickly get a microphone to you, just hear what you've got to say. We're getting to you, and there we are. We've got you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to make the point, because I think it's a really interesting debate around the role dual and former foreign citizens can play in the Australian political system, given that we actually have a former Prime Minister who is English-born and Oxford-educated, who's actually a constitutional monarchist. Now, when you think about that and reflect on what has been his path in life and how has that affected his views, and what's been the flow-on effect for Australian policy around republic versus constitutional or...
Well, actually, I'm going to stop you there, because the Republic has come up, and I'll quickly throw to Jim Chalmers, because Labor's now changed its view, or at least modified its view on where they're going with the Republic. Quick answer on that.
Well, we've said that we'll go to the people in the first term of a shortened Labor government to ask them if they want an Australian as head of state. Very simple question. And if they do, and I think that they will, then we will go back to them on the model that people prefer. And I think that's really a terrific thing for us to take on. It was announced by Bill Shorten in Melbourne.
So you won't go with a model, you'll go with the question as to whether you want to be a republic and then have a convention to choose a model.
Exactly right, exactly right. And I think that's an important thing for Australia to take on. You know, you hear people say all the time, oh, we can't possibly become a republic because other things are more important. I just think that's an absurd argument, because what it suggests is, you know, we would never say, oh, we can't have an economic policy because we've got to have a border security policy, or we can't have a health policy because that would prevent us from having an education policy. And I think what a lot of people are doing in this country is using this sort of false claim about a national inability to multitask as a reason to go down a very sensible path, which is to say to all of our kids, to say to all of our young people, that when you grow up, you have the capacity and the ability to become the head of state of your own country. It's an absurd situation where the Queen of England is the head of state of this country. And I think all of these arguments about, oh, we couldn't possibly prioritise that, or maybe after the Queen is gone, they're all just excuses because you can't defend the indefensible, which is to say to our kids they're not capable of being our own head of state.
I'm going to throw that to Steve Ciobo with a question. It is interesting, isn't it? That you can't be a dual citizen as a politician, but you have to pledge allegiance to the sovereign of another country.
Tony, you know, as a country, we've looked at this. I think, frankly, that the Australian public recognises that at some point in the future we'll have this referendum again, and I would say that the prevailing view is that we would do it after Queen Elizabeth passes away or steps down from the throne, whatever it might be.
You mean straight away, wait till Charles gets in, say he's no good,
well,
we'll move on?
I mean, I think that's the prevailing view, to be honest.
Really?
And I disagree with Jim. I mean, look, of course we can multitask. But I just think that this is a feel-good exercise from Labor. I actually don't think it carries significance. It is absolutely not about focusing on the core principles that Australians have elected us in terms of cost of electricity, cost of living and those things. And I actually think...
But you could probably do both
I
things at
acknowledge,
once if you're running a government.
we can multitask. I don't pretend we can't. But what I'm saying is that, yes, we can multitask, and we are choosing to focus on those other things because we think those other things are more important.
All right. Quick answers from the other panellists. And I'll go to Jessica first. What do you think about this? Just come out of the blue, really.
It's a very odd thing when you cover ministerial swearing-in ceremonies. You go to the Governor-General's house in Canberra and you drive down a long avenue. It's like you've entered a little piece of ye olde England. And I was there when Malcolm Turnbull signed in as the Environment Minister and the former head of the Republican movement put the hand on, I'm not sure if it's the Bible that they swear on in this country, and swore his allegiance to the Queen. So they all do it, and it makes a bit of a
most likely not the Quran.
No, I don't think it's
so.
the Quran.
Let's go to Greg Sheridan.
Look, three things. Let me be totally contrarian. Bad attack on Tony Abbott. We've got two former British-born Prime Ministers, Julia Gillard, Tony Abbott. One of them's a monarchist, one of them's a Republican. You never met a more ochre bloke in your life than Tony Abbott. If there is a trace of the English in him, God knows where you could find it. Second thing, you don't swear allegiance to the English Queen, you swear allegiance to the Queen of Australia. Third thing, if as I expect, the Labor Party wins the next election, Steve and his colleagues will be praying that the Labor Party introduces a republic referendum in the course of their first term, because I'll tell you what, it will lose badly, and the Liberals will surf back to popularity on the basis of its loss. I am a lifelong Republican. For God's sake, I'm an Irishman. It's in our genes, you know, we can't stand for the Queen. But when you look at the hideous complexity and grotesque, deformed nature of the things which people would put in the place of the Queen, who has never done a speck
sort
of
of
harm.
president like Donald Trump sort of thing.
Well, who knows? An elected president, how that would unbalance.
Republican, Greg.
Yeah, I am now part of that very elite group, Republicans for a Constitutional Monarchy. And I tell you what, if you guys introduce it, I'll campaign against it on my own. I'll defeat it by myself. I tell you what, it'll be so easy.
By the way,
to
we're going to move on, but I was just reminded actually that Ed Husick did in fact swear on the Quran. So apologies to Ed. The next question is from Edward Ford.
From recent events in the US, including the President's criticism of his appointed Attorney General, the replacement of his Chief of Staff, and the Communication Director's vulgar comment on his former colleague, the Trump administration has proven to be dangerously unpredictable. Despite the historically strong relationship between the United States and Australia, is it possible that the volatile nature of the current US administration could change relations between Australia and the United States?
Well, May, I know you're not an expert on Australia, but I'm going to start with you anyway, because the notion is that Trump is so unpredictable that even old allies could run afoul of his administration.
I think they already have to some extent, right? What Angela Merkel said, that, suddenly Germany, we're going to have to go it alone in some sense. He made it very abundantly clear at the last G20 that suddenly America is, unmoored by itself. They didn't sign, they pulled out of the Paris Accords. They have not taken a leadership role insofar as some of the major concerns, such as the North Korean missile crisis. Of course, one of the things he famously did with Australia was to hang up on the phone. So It is a new world order, I think, that we are seeing, one in which America is almost withdrawing from itself, from its leadership position. It's gone into a hermit-like position, and if I were to think of 2017 as a symbol or a year, I would think of it like a clam. This is the backlash of globalization. This is why we have Trump. This is why we have Brexit. So yes, it is destabilizing. Yes, the vacuum or the void that is happening will lead to other countries, other nations taking more of a prime spot. We will probably see China. We already have, in a way, taking much more of a leadership position with their One Belt, One Road initiative.
We're going to come back to that in a specific question in a little while. So I might just leave China there for a minute, and I'll go to Greg Sheridan on this question of as to whether Trump could destabilise our own relations with the United States.
Trump could do so. He hasn't yet. I was a never Trump conservative, and I annoyed all my readers by saying that I thought Trump was just a completely unacceptable person to be president. He has abundantly fulfilled that analysis. But nonetheless, the US alliance is of the most profound importance to Australia's national interest and indeed to global security. So what is smart for Australia to do through this period is to try to preserve the alliance and to get what good we can out of Trump. There are a few good things in Trump. He's appointed a better cabinet, I think, in national security than Obama had in his second term. And he hasn't done most of the radical things that he said. He speaks like a madman, but so far he hasn't done truly mad things. And at the end of the day, there is no substitute for America. China cannot substitute for America. You take America out of the system, you get entropy. You don't get a newly ordered system or a newly consultative system. You get the war of all against all. And I think, sensible policy now, and again, I'd praise both the government and the opposition for this, is to hold our nerve and be steady. The US-Australia alliance is much more than Donald Trump, and America is much more than Donald Trump.
Steve Ciobo.
Well, I agree with Greg's final comments. That is that the alliance is much more than...
What about his earlier comments?
Or one Prime Minister. I mean, we've seen the relationship... I mean, the relationship's always been strong. The relationship's always been strong. Yes, it has periods where it's stronger than others, but fundamentally we recognise the importance of remaining firm and fast allies and great friends with the US. And I do think that's long-standing and long-lasting. We saw, for example, when there were the media reports about the telephone call, a real rallying of support for Australia within the United States.
And not in the White House, though.
Well,
that sort of goes to the point of the question, really, the volatile nature of this president. Could he destabilise relations with Australia?
I think the PM summed it up best when he said it was more like family than anything else. So, that's the nature. I think that's a good benchmark to have in a relationship. Families sometimes squabble, but at the end of the day, we're strong.
Well, we've seen quite a few members of the Turnbull family, and not many of them are like Donald Trump. But anyway, Jessica.
Well, he can certainly be incredibly destabilising for the world economy. It was sort of a strange thing to watch when Trump was elected, and I thought markets will crash, the guy's crazy. Markets rallied because he promised to spend trillions of dollars on infrastructure to cut company taxes, and financial markets thought, yippee, we're going to have a global boom, and the US central bank was going to put up interest rates, and that was great because it was helping to relieve pressure on our Aussie dollar. What we've seen more recently is that nobody thinks he's actually going to do those things, or if he is, it's going to take a lot longer, and so it's going to take a lot longer for the US economy to recover, and that's having flow-on effects here. So, and he threatened to have a trade war. He could still, it is within his power as president to just slap a 40% tax on China. That's the world that we live in. He hasn't done it yet.
Jim Chalmers.
Well, Edward, you play the hand you dealt, basically, in foreign policy. There's a lot in what Greg said that I agree with. Our responsibility, really, our obligation as Australians is to make the best of this situation that we can. We don't have a say in who the Americans elect as their president. We don't have a say in who he hires as his communications director or who he fires, or what his communications director says to journalists when he thinks he's off the record. Those things are all interesting as observers of politics and participants in politics. But at the end of the day, our responsibility, articulated differently by Greg and Steve, but essentially true, is to make the best of this situation. We do want the Americans to be predictable and stable and rational actors, particularly in our region. And to the extent that we can help them be that, that's what we should be looking to do, but also establishing and maintaining our own relationships as well.
All right, remember you can join the discussion on Twitter and on Q&A Extra on Facebook Live and ABC News Radio right after this program. Our next question comes from Kevin Nolan.
My question is, in your opinion, is there any chance that China will concede to the Trump administration and sever its lifeline with North Korea in the immediate future? Or will it rather instead opt to continue its current position of publicly criticizing it whilst realistically doing nothing behind the scenes to affect any meaningful change for the region?
Hey Fong, a shift to focus here. Will China do anything to rein in North Korea, in particular its nuclear ambitions, ballistic missiles?
So there have been three major players in this, right? So China, North Korea, and the US. And out of that, two players' positions have been relatively clear and pretty straightforward and understandable from the start. China has always maintained, and supported North Korea because it is advantageous for them to. North Korea is their buffer state. If they didn't have that and North Korea collapsed, they'd have all the refugees coming over, and then suddenly they'd have the U.S. on their doorstep. They don't want that. So this is exactly what they've been doing all this time. I do not see why they would be changing that in any way, particularly when the current leader of China, Xi Jinping, is very focused on consolidating his leadership and appearing strong. They are having a major party congress coming up in September. He's not going to want to look weak before then, if anything else.
Wouldn't he look stronger if he took a stand against North Korea's nuclear ambitions, particularly its developing capacity with ballistic missiles?
He could he could say things, but at the core of it all, the position that he is in to support North Korea, you can see from their point of view why it's so advantageous. Why would they want to change that? North Korea, of course...
Maybe to prevent a nuclear conflict in the world, for example.
North Korea, for example, has... Also, the pattern there has been very steady. They, even though, yes, they are escalating, but they've always consistently been doing the same thing, which is trying to fire, get missiles to go further and further, and maybe at one point develop the technology for nuclear warheads that can go. So these two actors, you kind of know where they are. The one unstable element now is the other world leader with the power for nuclear weapons and the crazy hair, which is Donald Trump, not Kim Jong-un. And this is the question mark that You're
not saying that Trump is more dangerous than the North Korean?
He's unpredictable. I think everybody at this table has sort of said that, right? Everything that you thought that a president of the United States would not do, some things he has done. Now, on the foreign policy state, perhaps he hasn't done anything as radical as he has done internally, domestic policy, but hey, this is just, this week, it could change. And they've already been making a lot of noises saying that we might, do this, we might, we're not going to have a UN discussion on this, a security discussion on this. We're not taking military, action off the table. Now, maybe this is all rhetoric. That's true. There are many skilled, smarter hands at the table. The U.S. is more than just a president. But this president may not necessarily take the advice of the, smartest hands in the room. He has not necessarily shown that kind of thing. So he is unpredictable. This is the one element that I think that we do not know. And, Greg probably looks like he's going to jump in and shove it and argue with me on this. Are you?
Well, we'll give him the opportunity. Go ahead.
No, May, I hope this doesn't distress you too much, but I find myself in furious agreement with you, really. But look, a couple of points I'd add, though. One is that I think you're absolutely right. North Korea is a strategic asset to China in all the ways that you mentioned and in other ways too. Every American president in the 40 years that I've been a journalist has ended up going to Beijing, begging it for help with North Korea. That is enormous leverage. And the Chinese are very smart at saying, well, don't you come at us too hard on trade or human rights or whatever, or the South China Sea, then we won't help you on Pyongyang. I also think Beijing is much more guilty than it lets on for North Korea. Nobody knows entirely where all the North Korean nuclear technology comes from. A lot of it was indigenous development, but they got a hell of a lot of stuff from A.Q. Khan. Now, the Pakistanis pretended A.Q. Khan was a rogue, but he lives in splendid honour in Pakistan. The Pakistanis got all of their nuclear stuff from China, all of it. There is a hardline realist school of strategy which says China proliferated to North Korea to hurt its enemies, Japan and the US. It proliferated to Iran to hurt America in the Middle East, and it proliferated to Pakistan to hurt India, its big strategic rival in the subcontinent. That makes a lot of sense to me. It is also true, I think, that they do nothing effective against North Korea. Their trade with North Korea has increased, as has Russia's. Having said all that, I think China should be called out on this. But I don't see that there is anything the Americans can do. There is no military option.
Just switching to the other side of the equation, which May was just talking about, are you absolutely sure there's no military option? Because the military option was kept on the table for Iran developing nuclear weapons for a very long time and maybe back on the table for all we know, but not for North Korea.
Well, Tony, as you're too polite to remind me, I was absolutely sure Donald Trump wasn't going to be elected president, so I'm not absolutely sure of anything anymore. But I do believe that the Americans talk about a military option, but that it's only rhetoric. The intelligence boffins believe that North Korea already possesses in the order of 20 nuclear devices. It can't yet put them on intercontinental ballistic missiles. And when it can do that, that does change things radically, because then Los Angeles and Philadelphia are within its reach. It has been a rational regime. It's been a very successful Stalinist dynasty. It's into its third generation of Stalinist royal family still on the throne. So it doesn't want to get rid of that. But I don't believe, if the Americans felt they could take out every single North Korean nuclear device, what if they missed one? And what if that one was resting in a cargo ship in Seoul Harbour or in Tokyo Bay? And certainly if the North Koreans thought this was the end of their regime, they would fire whatever weapons they have. So all of that, I agree that there is an element of uncertainty with Trump that always makes you worried. But I do think every responsible element in the American system would be against a risky military option.
OK, I'm going to move on. I've heard from the internationalists there. We've got a very specific question we can bring the others in on. It's from Adriana Sakularas.
Yep. So my question is, given North Korean developments, Australia would be well advised to begin analysing ballistic missile defence needs, available technologies and possible deployment suitability for Northern Australia. So wouldn't this be a good time to start thinking about missile defence?
Steve Ciobo.
Well, we are thinking about these things all the time. That's precisely what the Defence Department's looking at. That's precisely the discussions that we're having with the Americans and others. I mean, look, unfortunately, North Korea is a clear and present danger, not just for Australia, but of course for the United States as well. And I think Greg provided really salient analysis about the challenges that we have. If this was straightforward, there would have been action quite a number of years ago. And in fact, I think perhaps the window of taking military action against North Korea is closed. But this is the very real decisions that need to be made, because every time you fail to act when you should have acted, the consequences of then acting further down the track become much more profound. And that's the challenge that we have now. It's incredibly hard to act now. But if they do work out the capability, which we don't believe they have, but if they do work out the capability to put a nuclear device on an ICBM, then that just ratchets us up again. And this is why I do believe all options need to be on the table.
So are you saying that Australia is now developing or intending to develop a nuclear missile defence shield of some sort?
No, I'm saying that analysis around what we should be doing as a country is currently being undertaken, not by the politicians, but by the experts in the Department of Defence about what that might look like.
They're looking specifically at that option.
Well, look, ultimately, we want resolution to this. Now, how we achieve resolution is the question that everyone's asking. I mean, that is not a straightforward issue to deal with. But I will be clear in terms of my view, which is that we must deal with the issue of North Korea. Now, whether that's through dialogue, which is always the preferable course of action, or whether it's something else, I think we've got to keep all of those options on the table.
Jessica.
Including military?
I think we've got to keep all options on the table.
No, he said earlier the window's closed on military strikes. So
it would appear so.
Yeah. Jessica.
Yeah, I just worry about giving politicians power to spend money on big military ticket items. Maybe there's a few Joint Strike Fighter jets we could cancel, but if you start to worry along those lines and think that we can defend ourselves from any threat, you can justify spending billions of dollars on any sort of piece of military equipment, and we've done that in the past, and we tend to buy dud, outdated things, even though they employ, maybe we could employ some workers to build them. This is well outside my area of expertise on the actual military threat, but I just caution against, a sentiment that we can absolutely defend against these things by purchasing new weapons.
Jim Chalmers.
There are a whole range of steps, Andriana, before that step, which is a pretty drastic step. If Steve's telling us that these things are being discussed and considered, then from opposition it's hard for me to tell you whether that's right or wrong. But before you get to that kind of drastic action, there are other things we can do. We've got a sanctions program, for example, to try and damage them economically and exert pressure that way. The North Koreans have got a developing cyber capacity. They're training lots of hackers, and we've obviously got, with our partners around the world, a whole range of strategies to deal with those cyber attacks. But at the end of the day, as others have alluded to, Kim Jong-un is a maniac, and this is the biggest threat to our region right now. And so right around the world, not just the Australians, especially the Americans, especially the South Koreans, especially the Japanese, everyone who's got skin in the game, are going through all of these scenarios to work out where we can have the best impact. There's no perfect answer. If there was a perfect answer, as other people have said, it would have been solved already.
Tony, could I issue just a tiny note on missile defence? We have an active missile defence program in our defence. We work with the Americans on missile defence all the time. We also have 3 Aegis-class destroyers which have missile defence. And missile defence is very effective against a small number of missiles. So you can't deter China or Russia or something. But a rogue state with a couple of missiles, you've got a real shot with missile defence.
Not so good against ballistic missiles.
It's a different type of missile defence, that's absolutely true. But missile defence is becoming more and more relevant to more and more countries. It's not a science fiction.
Yep.
We're doing it already.
OK, fair enough. Now, there's time for one last question. This one's from Georgia Sads on something we began to talk about earlier. Georgia.
So I'm wanting to ask about that One Belt, One Road initiative that you had mentioned, May. China has identified sort of over 60 countries that it wants to join together over a sort of a land and sea route. Many of these countries, including our closest neighbours, New Zealand, have signed up. It's such an exciting project being led by China, to sort of reignite this Silk Road, through a web of infrastructure and other projects. And Minister Ciobo at the One Belt, One Road summit earlier in the year, you said that it had such merit as a project, but Australia hasn't signed up to any of the projects nor signalled that it's going to. So why is Australia so hesitant to be part of this?
Thank you very much. I'll start with May. You've started talking to us about this earlier. Most people won't even know what it is. You better explain.
OK, so the One Belt, One Road is this very bold initiative that China has set up, which is to sort of build these huge infrastructural project, both one through land and one through sea, to connect a huge number of countries and all. It sounds very sexy. It sounds very exciting. It's been described as a sort of a Marshall Plan. Some of you are familiar with that. It, again, demonstrates China's leadership position in the world. This is the time when the U.S. has just withdrawn from TPP and, sort of put that apart. And suddenly China comes in and say, look, we've got this grand plan. Now, I don't know. I think you would probably be able to say why Australia has not signed up for it yet, or maybe is thinking about dipping its toe in the water. But China as a global player is a new one. Its intentions are different from previous ones. Say, for example, the things that used to motivate the United States, you kind of knew the ethos, human rights, certain things. Now, for example, with TPP, which I think was a missed opportunity, it was to build more trade pacts, but with certain kinds of strings attached in terms of expectations, in terms of human rights, for example, because you knew these were things that the United States cared about. China has its own different ethos. And so I think probably there are some countries that are a little bit hesitant.
Well, can we presume, for example, that the One Road will not go through North America? Might have to cross over a wall in Mexico to get there.
Well, we're building that wall, aren't we, with solar panels, and it'll be transparent so that all the drug dealers can hurl their drugs over it. It won't hit anyone. I don't know where the U.S. is on this. Foreign policy in the U.S. now, it's a bit Who knows? They could change the Secretary of State next week, right? And, they're always joking that Rex Tillerson maybe the next one to resign or be pushed out. They're calling it Rexit, So we don't know. But the U.S. is now in a state where it's, America first. We're not about, make America great again. We're not about signing tracts. We're not about, the Paris Accord. We're not about, kumbaya, everybody under the fold. So, I don't know if it is. And I don't know why Australia, so I'd be interested in...
I'll come to him in a minute. I'm just going to put him on hold. I just want to hear from Greg Sheridan, because the critics of this policy suggest it's all about Chinese strategic advantage, creating kind of economic and strategic advantage that will, in the end, threaten the US dominance in the region.
Look, I think One Belt, One Road, now renamed Belt Road, is a geostrategic play by China. I don't think there's anything wrong with us being involved in specific projects. Again, I think the Australian government has got to the right place on this. It says, we welcome Chinese foreign investment and we're happy to be involved in specific projects, but we're not going to sign up in a political way to a blank cheque to the Chinese government to work out what the development priorities are of all the nations that are going to receive infrastructure under this.
So why did our nearest neighbour, or one of our closest,
God knows
New Zealand, jump onto this bandwagon?
If you're nice to a Kiwi, they'll sign anything, basically. And but the bigger question with the Belt Road thing is, there's been a lot of trouble with Chinese infrastructure in a lot of countries, like in Africa and other parts of the world. There's been imported labour forces where they don't transfer skills. There's been excessive amounts of lending, which ends up with Pacific countries becoming hugely indebted. There's been questions of the exclusive use of infrastructure. Are these ports for the commercial use of everybody? Are they exclusively for Chinese use? There's no reason for us to sign up to all that politics. We love the Chinese, and we like foreign investment, but we'll take each project case by case.
OK, so now we go to Steve Ciobo, and what Greg Sheridan said there, what he said. So basically you have the same concerns that he's just expressed, is that right?
So what we've said, Tony, is look, we have a number of initiatives in Australia that we're undertaking, including the development of Northern Australia. That initiative is obviously a decision that we've taken as a government about what we need to be doing with Northern Australia. Now, there are absolutely opportunities for us to collaborate with Chinese businesses, with the Chinese government in relation to infrastructure. I mean, we've had some terrific success. We've had a couple of bad examples too of public-private partnerships. We can be there for the design, the construction, the management, project financing of infrastructure, all of these suite of different opportunities, and we're happy to engage with China on these opportunities.
But we're not going to sign One Belt, One Road?
There's this preoccupation about this memorandum of understanding that people are saying, well, why China? Look, we just think in the grand scheme of things, we're putting that to one side. We'll pursue our initiatives. China pursues its initiatives, and we'll find opportunities to work together. OK,
I'm afraid that's all we have time for tonight. We've just ran out of time. Please thank our panel: Greg Sheridan, Jim Chalmers, May Fong, Jessica Irvine and Steve Ciobo. Thank you very much, and thank you for your great questions in the audience. Remember, you can continue the discussion on Q&A Extra with guest hosts Scott Wales and Simon Cowan from the Centre for Independent Studies. They're taking comments on ABC News Radio and Facebook Live as soon as we finish. Now, next Monday, Q&A will come from the Garma Festival in Arnhem Land with guest hosts Stan Grant and a panel including Indigenous Affairs Minister Nigel Scullion, founder of the Cape York Partnership, Noel Pearson, local elder Jarpiti Mungarich and Denise Bowden from the Yotta Yindi Foundation. So for now, good night.
Still got something to say? Join the discussion on Q&A Extra now on ABC News Radio and Facebook Live. Wednesday. GovPort. From IT nightmares.
They replace the software, they replace the hardware.
They should have replaced the minister.
They replaced the minister.
To media training.
Stick to the talking points.
I was.
You weren't.
I was.
You weren't.
I was. This is great TV.
New Utopia.
I was in a good mood like 1 minute ago.
Wednesday at 9.
Let's play
Hard Quiz is back.
Now, your expert subject is banknotes of the world. Is Paywave doing your head in?
The new season of Hard Quiz starts Wednesday at 8 on ABC.
G'day, I'm Robbie Buck. Wake up with me for your local news, weather and traffic. And it's about you, the voices of Sydney in 2017. So call me, text me, join me. Weekday mornings from 5:30 on ABC Radio Sydney.
The BAFTA-winning series returns.
Do you remember our captain? I was always terrified of her. We've got a bit of a weirdo doing the rounds.
We are now looking at a serial offender.
Happy Valley, Friday on ABC and iView.
Hello, Jason On with the top stories from ABC News. 2 Afghan guards have been killed during an attack on the Iraqi embassy in the capital, Kabul. A bomber blew himself up, which comes 2 weeks after Iraqi forces recaptured the city of Mosul. The ABC can reveal the 4 men accused of planning to blow up a plane have strong links to senior Islamic State militants in Syria. Police expect to charge the group with terrorism offences within the next 48 hours